What happens when a man has everything? A multi-million-dollar tech empire, a beautiful home overlooking the San Francisco Bay, and a brilliant pregnant wife who adores him. For Brendan Cole, it wasn't enough. He craved more, and he found it in the arms of his ambitious subordinate, Kendra Jennings. Together they mocked the woman carrying his child, calling her a domesticated pet who wouldn't know a stock option from a grocery coupon. They thought she would crumble. They thought she would take the hush money and disappear. They made one fatal miscalculation. They never imagined that the woman they tried to break was the same woman who would one day walk into their boardroom, not as a forgotten wife, but as the billionaire investor holding their entire future in the palm of her hand. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's the story of a titan's rise from the ashes of betrayal. The chandeliers at the Fairmont Hotel dripped crystals like frozen tears, casting a fractured, glittering light over San Francisco's tech elite. Hannah Foster felt as though she were viewing the scene through a distorted lens. At 7 months pregnant, the sheer weight of the baby seemed to pull her center of gravity down, grounding her in a way that felt alien in this room of high flyers. She smoothed a hand over the bespoke silk of her maternity gown, a deep sapphire that Brendan had picked out. "It makes you look regal," he'd said, a compliment that felt more like a command. Brendan Cole, her husband, was holding court across the ballroom. He was a supernova in a tailored Tom Ford suit, the founder and CEO of Synergy Innovations, a data analytics firm that had become the darling of Silicon Valley. He laughed a deep, confident sound that always drew people in and clapped a venture capitalist on the back. Hannah watched him, a familiar mix of pride and a strange gnawing loneliness filling her chest. She had been there from the start, before the IPO, before the magazine covers back when Synergy was just a concept scribbled on napkins in their tiny Palo Alto apartment. Her background was in computational linguistics and AI ethics, and her early frameworks were the quiet, uncredited bedrock on which Brendan had built his empire. But as the company grew, her role had shrunk first to supportive spouse, then to homemaker, and now to expectant mother. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she gripped the back of a velvet chair. The air was thick with expensive perfume, and the cloying scent of champagne, a drink she could no longer have. She needed to find Brendan, to tell him she needed to sit down, maybe even go home. She navigated the clusters of chattering guests, her smile feeling like a mask plastered to her face. She spotted him near the terrace doors, his back to her. He wasn't alone. He was with Kendra Jennings, his vice president of strategy. Kendra was everything Hannah wasn't, at that moment sleek sharp and dressed in a blood-red dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her ambition was a palpable force field around her. Hannah had always been wary of Kendra, of the way her eyes lingered on Brendan a second too long, the way she laughed at his jokes with a throaty intimacy that felt unprofessional. Hannah paused behind a large marble pillar, gathering her strength before interrupting. And then she heard it. Kendra's voice, a low, conspiratorial murmur. "She looks exhausted, Bren. Are you sure you should have brought her?" Brendan's reply was a low chuckle, stripped of the warmth he performed for the public. "It's good for appearances. The devoted family man. Investors eat that stuff up. Besides, where else would she be? She's got the nesting instinct in full force. I'm surprised she's not at home alphabetizing the spice rack." A cold dread, heavier than her pregnancy, began to settle in Hannah's stomach. This wasn't just office gossip. This was different. Kendra's laugh was sharp, like shattering glass. "God, you're terrible. What does she even do all day? I picture her just waiting for you to come home. It's so quaint, almost tragic." She's useful, Brendan said, his voice laced with a casual cruelty that stole the air from Hannah's lungs. She keeps the house running, plans these boring events. It frees me up to focus on what matters. She doesn't understand our world, Ken. She wouldn't know a Series C funding round from a car payment. She's my little housewife, perfectly content in her gilded cage. The gilded cage. The words echoed in the sudden roaring silence of Hannah's mind. He saw her as a pet, a decorative, functional object. The dizziness returned with a vengeance, but this time it was laced with the bitter tang of betrayal. Kendra leaned closer, her red lips almost touching his ear. Well, when you're ready to deal with someone who does understand your world, someone who can help you build the empire, not just dust the furniture in it, you know where I am. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Brendan didn't pull away. He placed a hand on the small of Kendra's back, a gesture of casual ownership that was a dagger in Hannah's heart. The room began to spin in earnest. The crystal chandeliers blurred into streaks of painful light. The chatter of the crowd faded into a dull hum. She couldn't breathe. Her hand, which had been resting on her swollen belly, slipped. She tried to call his name, but no sound came out. All she could think of was the phrase, gilded cage. He had built it for her, and she had willingly, lovingly locked herself inside. Her knees buckled. With a soft gasp, Hannah Foster collapsed onto the cold marble floor, the last thing she saw being the horrified, annoyed face of her husband as he turned his hand, still resting on his mistress's back. The scene he so desperately wanted to avoid had just begun, and the woman he had just mocked was at the very center of it. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room was a stark contrast to the cloying opulence of the gala. Hannah woke up to the steady rhythmic beeping of a fetal heart monitor, a reassuring sound that did little to calm the frantic symphony of her own shattered heart. A kind-faced nurse explained that she had fainted from a combination of dehydration and stress. The baby, a boy, was fine, but the doctor warned that she needed to avoid any undue anxiety. It was a laughable, impossible prescription. Brendan was there sitting in a chair by the window, scrolling through his phone. He had perfected the look of a concerned husband for the benefit of the medical staff, but when the nurse left, the mask dropped. "You created quite a scene, Hannah," he said, his voice low and tight with irritation. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't ask about the baby. Hannah stared at him, the man she thought she knew, and saw only a stranger. The fog of shock had receded, replaced by a crystalline Arctic clarity. "I heard you," she said, her voice raspy but firm. "You and Kendra." By the terrace. He had the decency to look momentarily startled, his thumb freezing over the screen of his phone, but it was quickly replaced by a defensive sneer. "Oh, come on. You fainted to get my attention because you overheard some harmless office banter. A bit dramatic, don't you think? You called me your little housewife," she whispered the words tasting like poison. "You called me a pet in a gilded cage." It was a figure of speech, he snapped, finally standing up and pacing the small room. "Don't be so sensitive. Kendra and I were just blowing off steam. This is a high-pressure world, Hannah, a world you've been happy to be insulated from, a world you don't understand." There it was again. "You don't understand." The patronizing phrase he used to end any conversation about his business, her ideas, their life. It was a wall he had built between them, brick by condescending brick. "I understand betrayal, Brendan," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I understand being mocked by my husband and the woman he's sleeping with while I'm carrying his child." He stopped pacing and glared at her. The pretense was over. "Fine," he spat. Yes, me and Kendra. It's been happening for a while, and you want to know why, because she gets it. She's hungry, she's smart. She isn't content to just sit at home and plan dinner parties. She challenges me. What have you done lately, Hannah? Besides redecorate the guest room, each word was a physical blow. The life they had built, the sacrifices she had made, her uncredited contributions. He had erased it all, rewriting their history to cast her as a freeloader. I put my entire career on hold for you, she said, her voice trembling with a rage she hadn't known she possessed. The foundational algorithms for Synergy's core software, the ethical framework that got you your first seed funding from that socially conscious investment firm. That was my work, he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Ideas are nothing without execution, sweetheart. You had some cute concepts, I'll give you that. But I'm the one who built the billion-dollar company. And frankly, you've become a liability. This pregnancy, your constant neediness. You're holding me back. The cruelty was so absolute, so profound, it was almost stunning. He didn't just want a divorce, he wanted to annihilate her. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a folded document, placing it on the bedside table. My lawyer drew this up last week. It's a divorce settlement. It's incredibly generous. You'll have the house in Sausalito, a lump sum that will let you live comfortably for the rest of your life. All you have to do is sign it, along with an NDA, and walk away quietly. No fuss, no mess. He was trying to buy her silence, to package up a decade of her life, and pay it off like a business expense. He thought she was weak, that she would take the money and crumble. And in that moment, seeing the cold, transactional look in his eyes, Hannah Foster died, and someone else was born. She looked at the papers, then back at him. No, she said. His eyes narrowed. What do you mean, no? Hannah, this is the best deal you'll ever get. Don't be stupid. Get out, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. Don't make this difficult. I said, get out. Her voice cracked through the room, sharp and final. For the first time, Brendan looked truly taken aback. He saw something in her eyes he didn't recognize. Not sadness, not desperation, but steel. He snatched the papers off the table. Fine. Have it your way. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. He stormed out of the room without a backward glance. That night, after being discharged, Hannah took a taxi, not to their opulent mansion, but to a small, secure storage unit she had rented months ago under her maiden name, a tiny act of independence she hadn't even known she needed until now. Then she went home. The house was silent, empty. He was with Kendra. She didn't pack clothes. She went straight to his home office. For years, Brendan had brought work home, and for years, she had helped him unofficially. She had copies of early-stage project files, initial code bases, and strategy documents on her old personal laptop, which was stored in the back of her closet. More importantly, she had the original dated digital notebooks from her PhD work, the very notebooks containing the core concepts he had called cute ideas. She wasn't looking for blackmail material. She was looking for proof of her own brilliance. She spent 2 hours methodically copying files onto a series of encrypted hard drives. It wasn't theft, it was reclamation. She was taking back the pieces of herself she had given him. Before she left, she walked into the nursery, a room painted a soft, hopeful yellow. It was a monument to a future that was now a lie. With a tearless resolve, she went back to the kitchen, found the settlement offer Brendan had contemptuously left on the counter, and signed it. She signed her name, Hannah Foster, with a firm, steady hand. Then, underneath her signature, she wrote 3 more words. I reject this offer. She left the document in the center of the vast marble kitchen island where he would be sure to find it. Then, with a small bag and a laptop full of her stolen past and potential future, she walked out of the gilded cage forever, the click of the closing door sounding not like an ending, but like the cocking of a gun. The first few months were the wilderness. The world that had been cushioned by Brendan's millions was suddenly hard and sharp at every edge. As he had threatened, her name was removed from their joint accounts with ruthless efficiency. The credit cards ceased to work. Her friends, the wives of Brendan's colleagues and investors, stopped answering her calls, their silence a clear verdict in favor of the man with the money. Hannah found a small month-to-month rental apartment in a less fashionable part of Oakland, a place with peeling paint and windows that overlooked a brick wall. The contrast with her former life was a daily humbling shock. The loneliness was a physical presence, a constant companion as she navigated the third trimester of her pregnancy, alone. There were nights when fear was a suffocating blanket, when she would sit in the dark, a hand on her stomach, and wonder if she had made a catastrophic mistake. Brendan's words, "You're nothing without me," would echo in the silence. But then the baby would kick a tiny, insistent flutter that reminded her what she was fighting for. This wasn't just about her survival anymore. It was about building a world for her son, a world where his mother wasn't a footnote in someone else's story. Instead of wallowing, she worked. Her small apartment became a war room. The encrypted hard drives were her arsenal. She didn't look at Brendan's current company data. That was a legal line she wouldn't cross. She focused only on her own original work from before, and during the earliest days of Synergy, the raw, brilliant concepts he had dismissed. She pored over her old PhD research, the complex algorithms on ethical AI and predictive modeling. She saw it now with fresh eyes, a system that could analyze vast datasets, not for crass commercial exploitation, as Synergy did, but for societal good. It could predict supply chain disruptions, model the spread of diseases, or identify underserved communities for resource allocation, all while using a proprietary ethical framework to anonymize data and eliminate bias. It was the anti-Synergy. She knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed an ally, someone from her past life, the one before Brendan. She thought of Dr. Robert Miller, her former mentor at Stanford. He was a titan in the field of computational linguistics, a man who valued intellectual integrity above all else. Finding his email was easy. Composing the message was one of the hardest things she had ever done. She laid out her situation with clinical honesty, attached a 20-page prospectus outlining her new venture, and hit send with a trembling finger. For 3 days there was only silence. Hannah's hope began to curdle into despair. Then an email appeared in her inbox. The subject line was simple: "Call me RM." Their video call was a lifeline. Professor Miller's face, framed by a chaotic bookshelf, was etched with concern, which quickly turned to academic excitement as she walked him through her proposal. "Hannah, this is the evolution of your doctoral thesis," he said, his eyes alight. "I always told you your work on data ethics was revolutionary. What Cole did, he took the engine of your car and put it in a bulldozer. You want to put it in a starship." He saw her. He saw her mind, her contribution, the very thing Brendan had tried to erase. His validation was the first drop of rain in a long drought. "But Rob," she said, her voice catching, "I have nothing. I'm pregnant, I'm about to be in a nasty divorce, and I have maybe 2 months of living expenses left. Who is going to invest in me? The right people," he said, with a grim certainty. "Silicon Valley is full of sharks like Cole, but there are still a few idealists. People who believe tech should solve problems, not just create new ways to sell ads. Let me make some calls." Professor Miller was a man of his word. He connected her with a small boutique venture capital firm called Tangent Ventures. They were known for backing long-shot high-concept ideas, especially those founded by women and minorities who were often overlooked by mainstream VCs. The pitch was the most terrifying day of her life. At 8.5 months pregnant, she stood before 3 partners in a sparse conference room. She didn't have a fancy presentation or a prototype. She had her laptop, her research, and an unshakable belief in her own work. She didn't mention Brendan or Synergy. She simply laid out the vision for a new kind of data intelligence. She named her company Axiom Dynamics Axiom for self-evident truth. They listened, their faces unreadable. They asked hard, probing questions for 2 solid hours. They challenged her assumptions, they poked holes in her financial projections. Hannah answered every query with the calm, incisive precision of an academic defending her thesis. At the end, the lead partner, a woman named Nina Chen, leaned back in her chair. "Ms. Foster," she said, "this is either complete vaporware or the most important idea that's crossed our desk in 5 years. Your personal circumstances are unconventional. But we don't invest in circumstances. We invest in founders. And you are, without a doubt, a founder." They offered her a seed round. It wasn't a staggering amount, but it was enough. Enough for a small office, a server rack, and to hire a handful of brilliant, hungry coders. It was enough to start. 2 weeks later, Hannah went into labor. She took a taxi to the hospital alone. After 18 hours of grueling labor, she held her son in her arms. He was perfect. He had her eyes. She looked down at his tiny, sleeping face, and the last vestiges of fear and doubt were burned away by a fierce, primal love. She named him Caleb, which meant faithful and wholehearted. Holding him, she knew that this was the true beginning. The pain of the past year hadn't broken her. It had forged her. Brendan had taken her life, and in its place she had created a new one. 2, in fact, her son and her company. The wilderness was over. It was time to build. The next 5 years were a blur of relentless work fueled by black coffee and a determination that bordered on obsession. Axiom Dynamics was born not in a sleek Silicon Valley garage, but in a cramped rented office space in Berkeley that always smelled faintly of burnt toast from the deli downstairs. Hannah's life became a tightly choreographed dance between motherhood and entrepreneurship. There were days she would code with one hand while rocking Caleb's bassinet with her foot. She conducted investor calls on mute from a park playground, praying her toddler wouldn't choose that exact moment to have a meltdown. She faced down rooms of skeptical men who saw her not as a CEO, but as a mompreneur, a dismissive label that only hardened her resolve. One investor told her to her face that her family situation presented a significant risk. She thanked him for his time and walked out her mind, already calculating how to make him regret that statement. She built her team, carefully seeking out not just talent, but character. She hired Jessica Riley, a whip-smart operations expert who had been pushed out of a major tech firm after reporting a toxic work culture. She hired engineers and data scientists who were disillusioned with the move fast and break things ethos of the Valley people who wanted to build something that mattered. They were a team of underdogs, and they were fiercely loyal to Hannah and her vision. Axiom's breakthrough came not with a flashy consumer app, but with a complex, unglamorous contract with a major international logistics company. Their existing predictive models for supply chain management were failing, costing them millions. Hannah and her team flew in, and within 6 months, Axiom's platform, built on her ethical bias-aware algorithms, had increased their efficiency by 30% and accurately predicted a major port strike that would have crippled their competitors. Word began to spread. Axiom wasn't just another analytics firm. It was a black box that saw the future more clearly than anyone else. They were hired by governments to model public health crises, by insurance companies to create fairer risk assessments, and by non-profits to optimize aid distribution in disaster zones. They were quiet, effective, and increasingly indispensable. Hannah, once the invisible wife, was now the visionary CEO of one of tech's most respected new companies. She never gave interviews about her personal life. She let the work and the rapidly growing valuation of her company speak for itself. Meanwhile, Brendan Cole and Synergy Innovations were on a different trajectory. They were bigger, louder, and far more famous. Brendan was the tech bro king perpetually featured in magazines, with Kendra, now his COO and fiancée, at his side. They expanded aggressively, acquiring smaller companies and launching splashy, data-hungry products that bordered on invasive. But cracks were beginning to show in their foundation. A massive data leak exposed the personal information of millions of users, resulting in a hefty fine. Accusations surfaced that their hiring algorithm was demonstrably biased against female candidates. Their stock, once a rocket ship, began to stagnate. Brendan's strategy was to double down, to push for more growth at any cost, silencing internal dissent and ignoring the warning signs. He and Kendra were blinded by their own arrogance, convinced that their market dominance was unassailable. The divorce had been finalized years ago. Brendan, furious at her refusal to settle quietly, had fought her tooth and nail. But Hannah, with the backing of Tangent Ventures' legal team, had been methodical. She didn't ask for alimony. She asked for something he considered worthless, a formal legal acknowledgement of her intellectual property contributions to Synergy's foundational technology. To end the fight and avoid a messy public discovery process, he'd agreed, laughing with his lawyers, about how his ex-wife wanted credit for some old college papers. It was a footnote in the divorce decree, a tiny clause he would forget almost immediately. But Hannah never forgot. The moment she had been waiting for, the opportunity she had been patiently engineering for 60 straight months, arrived on a Tuesday morning in an email from Jessica Riley. It was an internal market analysis report. Subject: Synergy, Q3 burn rate and investor risk. The report was devastating. Synergy had over-leveraged itself on a reckless acquisition. Its primary institutional investor, a conservative pension fund, was spooked by the ongoing privacy scandals and was threatening to pull its funding. They were bleeding cash, desperately needing a massive new round of investment to stay solvent. They were vulnerable. For the first time in his life, Brendan Cole was in trouble. Hannah read the report, a slow, cold smile spreading across her face. She looked at a photo on her desk, a smiling 6-year-old Caleb on his first day of school. Her fight for survival had made her strong. Her work had made her rich. But Brendan's hubris was about to make her a queen. She picked up her phone and called her head of finance. "I want you to get in touch with our contacts at Rothschild & Co." She said, her voice calm and even. "I want to quietly set up a new investment vehicle. A shell corporation. Let's call it Phoenix Capital. It's time to go shopping." The boardroom on the 55th floor of the Salesforce Tower was a shrine to corporate power. A single slab of polished mahogany stretched 30 feet, surrounded by panoramic windows that offered a god's-eye view of the San Francisco Bay. Brendan Cole adjusted his tie, the knot feeling uncomfortably tight. Beside him, Kendra Jennings tapped a perfectly manicured nail on her tablet, her usual icy composure showing the barest hint of a crack. The past 3 months had been a living hell. Their lead investor had pulled out just as Hannah's intel had predicted. The press was circling, sniffing out the story of Synergy's financial distress, They were hemorrhaging talent and teetering on the edge of collapse. This meeting was their last hope. Their investment bankers had arranged it with a mysterious European investment consortium, Phoenix Capital. They were new, aggressive, and had incredibly deep pockets. They had expressed a serious interest in a majority stake in Synergy, a deal that would save the company, and more importantly, save Brendan and Kendra. "They're here," the banker whispered, his face pale with anxiety. Brendan straightened his shoulders, forcing the charismatic, confident smile that had charmed 100 boardrooms. This was his stage. He was Brendan Cole. He could sell anything to anyone. Kendra gave his hand a quick, nervous squeeze. The grand glass doors at the end of the room swung open. 2 people walked in first, a man and a woman in severe dark suits, their faces impassive. They were clearly lawyers or advisors. They moved to the side of the door. Brendan and Kendra held their breath, waiting for the titan of industry, the faceless European billionaire, to make his entrance. And then she walked in. She wore a tailored suit of ivory white, a stark, brilliant contrast to the dark-suited figures around her. Her hair was no longer the soft, long style he remembered. It was cut in a sharp, elegant bob that framed a face that was both familiar and utterly alien. The softness was gone, replaced by a formidable poise. Her eyes, the same deep blue he once knew, now held an unnerving, analytical calm. She moved with an unhurried grace, her heels making a soft, deliberate clicking sound on the marble floor, a sound like a clock ticking down. It was Hannah. Brendan felt the blood drain from his face. A roaring sound filled his ears, and the panoramic view behind her seemed to tilt on its axis. He could feel Kendra go rigid beside him, her sharp intake of breath, a tiny, wounded sound in the cavernous room. This was impossible. This was a nightmare. This was his little housewife, the woman he'd discarded and dismissed standing before him as the potential savior of his crumbling empire. Hannah walked to the head of the table, the seat opposite Brendan, the seat of ultimate power. Her team arranged themselves silently around her. She didn't look at Kendra. She didn't even glance at the terrified bankers. Her gaze was fixed solely on Brendan, and it was as cool and unyielding as the view of the Pacific Ocean behind her. She placed a slim, encrypted tablet on the table in front of her, the movement precise and economical. She looked up, and for the first time, a small, knowing smile touched her lips. It wasn't warm. It was the smile of a predator that has finally cornered its prey after a very, very long hunt. "Brendan." "Kendra," she said, her voice smooth and devoid of any emotion except a faint, chilling amusement. "It's been a while." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes glittering. "My associates tell me Synergy is looking for an investor. I've reviewed your pitch deck. I have some notes." The word notes hung in the air, weighted with 5 years of silence. 5 years of struggle. 5 years of meticulously planned revenge. Brendan opened his mouth to speak, to protest, to rage, but no sound came out. He was paralyzed. The ghost he had created, the woman he had tried to bury under a mountain of money and contempt, was not only back from the dead, she had come to feast on the ruins of his life. The air in the boardroom was thick with a stunned, suffocating silence. Brendan stared at Hannah, his mind struggling to process the sheer impossibility of the situation. Kendra, for her part, had regained a sliver of her composure, her expression hardening into a mask of defiant fury. "What is this?" Hannah Kendra snapped, her voice sharp. "Some kind of pathetic joke. You set up this charade to what, gloat?" Hannah didn't even turn her head to look at Kendra. She continued to hold Brendan's gaze, a silent, powerful dismissal that was more insulting than any retort. "This is not a joke, Ms. Jennings," Hannah said, her tone as crisp and cold as a winter morning. "This is a due diligence meeting. Phoenix Capital, which I own, is considering an acquisition. So please, let's maintain a professional decorum." She swiped a finger across her tablet, and the massive screen at the end of the room flickered to life. It displayed Synergy's logo, followed by a slide titled Q3 2025, Financials, an Analysis of Systemic Failure. "Let's begin with your burn rate," Hannah said, and for the next 30 minutes, she conducted the most brutal, systematic corporate assassination the room had ever witnessed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't use insults. She used their own data as a weapon, turning their numbers, their projections, and their strategies against them with surgical precision. She pointed out the inflated user engagement metrics they'd used to justify their last valuation. An interesting choice to counter one. 5-second autoplay video scroll as an active engagement. Brendan. Bold. And according to SEC guidelines, borderline fraudulent. She dissected the disastrous acquisition that was draining their cash reserves, highlighting a key vulnerability in the target company's code that her team at Axiom had identified 2 years prior. You paid $500 million for a company with a core security flaw, so fundamental a first-year computer science student could have driven a truck through it. Did anyone on your team even read the source code? She turned her attention to Kendra. A new slide appeared, showing Kendra's signature on a series of financial projections submitted to their investors. "Ms. Jennings, these growth projections for your European expansion. They're based on a market penetration model that completely ignores the GDPR regulations that went into effect last year. This isn't just an oversight. This is either gross incompetence or a deliberate attempt to mislead." "Which is it?" Kendra's face went pale. The bankers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Synergy board members on the video call who had been watching in silence began to murmur amongst themselves. Brendan finally found his voice, a choked, desperate sound. "Stop it, Hannah. This is a personal vendetta. You're trying to destroy me." Hannah finally leaned back, a flicker of something real, not hatred, but a profound, weary disappointment in her eyes. "Destroy you, Brendan. You did this to yourself. You built a company on a foundation of arrogance and unethical shortcuts. It was always going to collapse. I'm just here to watch it happen." She looked around the table at the grim-faced board members. "You see, you have all been laboring under a misapprehension. I am not here to invest in Synergy. An investment would be like pouring water into a sieve. Synergy as it currently exists is worthless." She let that sink in. The silence was absolute. However, she continued, "It has some salvageable assets. Some patents, server infrastructure, a few talented mid-level engineers who aren't culpable in this disaster. Phoenix Capital is therefore prepared to make an offer. Not an investment. A buyout." A new slide appeared. It showed a number. It was shockingly low, just enough to cover Synergy's outstanding debts and allow the board members to escape a tidal wave of shareholder lawsuits, but far from the billion-dollar valuation Brendan had once boasted. It was an offer of corporate extinction. "The terms are as follows," Hannah said, her voice dropping each word, a hammer blow. "We acquire all assets and intellectual property. The Synergy brand will be dissolved. Most of the staff will be let go, and of course Mr. Cole and Ms. Jennings will be terminated effective immediately. All stock options will be cancelled. No severance, no golden parachute. You will both walk away with absolutely nothing. You can't do that." Brendan roared, slamming his fists on the table. "This company is my life." "You think you can just take it from me? I can," Hannah said simply. "Because the board knows this is their only way out. And because legally, I have a claim you seem to have forgotten." One of her lawyers slid a document across the table. It was a copy of their divorce decree with one small clause highlighted in yellow. The clause where Brendan had years ago laughed as he signed away the acknowledgement of her foundational IP contributions. "My lawyers believe," Hannah said calmly, "that this clause gives me standing to sue Sinner G for years of unpaid royalties and intellectual property theft. A lawsuit that would not only bankrupt you personally, Brendan, but would mire this company in litigation for the next decade. Or the board can accept my very clean, very simple offer. The choice is theirs." The board members on the screen began talking over each other, their decision already clear. They were cutting their losses. They were cutting him loose. Brendan looked at Hannah, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. He was cornered, humiliated, and beaten. He played his last, most pathetic card. "Hannah, please," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Think about us. Think about our son. Caleb, you're doing this to your own son's father." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Hannah leaned forward, and for the first time her voice was laced with a white-hot fury that made every person in the room flinch. "Do not," she hissed, "ever speak his name in this room. I did not do this to you. I did this for him. My son deserves to have a mother who builds empires, not one who sits by the phone waiting for a man who despises her. I built a future for Caleb on the ashes of the life you tried to burn down." She stood up, her presence filling the room. "You have 1 hour to accept the offer. If I don't have a signed term sheet by then, I walk. And by Monday morning, Sinner G will be a case study in every business school textbook on how arrogance, greed, and underestimating the woman you wronged can lead to utter ruin. Your clock is ticking." With that, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, her team falling in line behind her, leaving Brendan Cole alone in the wreckage of his kingdom, finally truly understanding the magnitude of his mistake. The news of the takeover hit the financial world like a shockwave. "Axiom's Foster Engineers' hostile takeover of ailing Sinner G," screamed the headline in the Wall Street Journal. "Phoenix from the ashes, how Hannah Foster bought her ex-husband's empire for pennies on the dollar." The story was irresistible, a tale of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate triumph. Hannah was instantly lionized as a new kind of tech visionary strategic patient and utterly ruthless when she needed to be. She declined every interview request, letting the results speak for themselves. The fallout for Brendan and Kendra was swift and brutal. Stripped of their company, their stock, and their reputations, they became pariahs in the world that had once worshipped them. Their engagement fell apart in a spectacular public fashion, culminating in a shouting match in the street, captured by paparazzi. Kendra, blaming Brendan for his arrogance and for underestimating Hannah, left him. The last anyone heard, she was consulting for a no-name startup in another state. Brendan fared even worse. Drowning in legal fees and personal debt, he was forced to sell the mansions, the cars, the entire facade of his former life. He tried to launch a new venture, but no investor would touch him. His name was toxic, a permanent stain. He had flown too close to the sun, and the woman he'd scorned had melted his wings. He was a ghost in the valley he once ruled, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. One sunny Saturday afternoon, a few months after the acquisition, Hannah was not in a boardroom. She was in Golden Gate Park, pushing Caleb on a swing. He was 7 now, a bright, laughing boy with his father's dark hair and her steady, intelligent eyes. "Higher, Mom, higher," he yelled, his legs kicking with joyous abandon. Hannah smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, Okay, superstar, hold on tight. This was her victory. Not the boardroom takedown, not the headlines, not the billions in her bank account. It was this peace, this freedom, the ability to be present, to push her son on a swing without a knot of anxiety in her stomach, without waiting for a dismissive text or a condescending remark. Later, as they sat on a bench eating ice cream, her COO Jessica Riley sent her a text. Integration of Synergy assets is 80% complete. We've salvaged the core cloud infrastructure and a stellar engineering team from their mobile division. The rest of the toxic code and culture has been purged. What should we do with the old Synergy office building lease? Hannah thought for a moment. Her first instinct was to tear it down, to erase every trace of him. But that was his way, not hers. Destruction was easy. Building was hard. She texted back, terminate the lease, and offer generous severance and job placement assistance to every laid-off employee who wasn't in senior management. They didn't build his culture of corruption. Let's give them a chance to build something better elsewhere. It was a business decision, clean and final. Revenge had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited the fire. But the fire itself had become something more. It was about building a company on principles of integrity and respect. It was about creating a legacy for her son. The satisfaction of watching Brendan's world crumble was a fleeting, bitter dessert. The deep, lasting joy came from the empire she had built in its place. She looked at Caleb, who was now chasing a butterfly across the grass, his face a picture of pure, uncomplicated happiness. She hadn't become this powerful, this successful, just to punish Brendan. Her journey had been a fight for survival, for her son's future, for her own right to exist as more than just a footnote. The fact that her path to self-actualization had led her directly through the ruins of his company was simply, as she saw it, a form of cosmic justice. He hadn't just cheated on his wife. He had betrayed his best asset, and in the ruthless meritocracy of the world they both inhabited, that was the one mistake that could never be forgiven. Her empire was founded on a new axiom: the future is built by those you underestimate. 3 more years passed. The name Synergy was now little more than a ghost, a half-forgotten brand, absorbed into the much larger, more respected entity of Axiom Dynamics. Axiom hadn't just grown, it had fundamentally shifted the landscape of data intelligence. Hannah Foster was no longer just a CEO. She was a thought leader, a philanthropist, and one of the most influential women in global technology. She had established the Caleb Foster Foundation, a multi-billion-dollar initiative dedicated to funding education for underprivileged children and promoting ethical standards in AI development. Her success was no longer a story of revenge. It was a story of transformation. Her life had found a new, calmer rhythm. Her days were a balance of high-stakes board meetings and school pickups. Her evenings were for homework help and bedtime stories, not solitary nights, fueled by coffee and code. Caleb was a kind and curious boy who was proud of his mother, but blissfully unaware of the dramatic specifics of her past. To him, she was just Mom. One crisp autumn afternoon, Hannah was attending a small private tech conference at Stanford University, a return to the place where her intellectual journey had begun. She was the keynote speaker. After her talk, which focused on the future of ethical AI, she decided to take a quiet walk through the familiar campus, a wave of nostalgia washing over her. As she passed by the main quad, she saw a man sitting on a bench, staring at the Rodin sculptures. He was thinner than she remembered, with threads of grey in his once perfectly coiffed hair. He wore a simple jacket and jeans, a stark contrast to the tailored suits that had been his uniform. It took her a moment to realize it was Brendan. Her security detail, a discreet man named David, tensed beside her, but Hannah gave a slight shake of her head. Brendan hadn't seen her. He looked diminished. The supernova of charisma had collapsed into a quiet, tired star. Curiosity, not anger or fear, guided her feet. She walked towards him. "Brendan," she said, her voice even. He looked up, and his eyes widened in shock. For a moment, she saw a flash of the old defensiveness, the old anger. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a weary resignation. "Hannah," he said, his voice raspy, as if he hadn't used it much that day. "Of course. I should have known you'd be here. Keynote speaker, I assume?" "Something like that," she replied, remaining standing. "What are you doing here?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Looking for a job? A friend of mine is a professor here. He thought maybe there was a research assistant position open. It's not going well. My name isn't exactly a door opener these days." The irony was staggering. The man who had once commanded billion-dollar valuations was now hoping for a university job. "I'm sorry to hear that," Hannah said, and to her own surprise, she meant it. The raging fire of her anger had burned out long ago, leaving behind only the cold embers of a past that felt like it belonged to someone else. He looked at the ground, then back at her. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by something raw and honest. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I was wrong. About everything. About you." He shook his head slowly. "I was so blinded by me, by the image, the money. I had this brilliant partner right beside me the whole time, and I was too stupid and too arrogant to see it. I threw away the most valuable asset I ever had. And I'm not talking about the company." He finally met her eyes, and she saw profound, hollowed-out regret. How's the boy?" "Caleb is wonderful," she said softly. "He's smart and he's kind. He's happy." A flicker of pain crossed Brendan's face. "That's good. That's all that matters." He stood up, as if her presence was a weight he couldn't bear for long. "Well, I won't keep you. You have empires to run." He started to walk away, a man stripped of everything that had once defined him. Brendan, Hannah called out. He stopped but didn't turn around. "For what it's worth," she said, choosing her words carefully, "I forgive you. Not for you. For me. I let it go a long time ago." He stood motionless for a long moment. Then he gave a single sharp nod and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the sandstone arches. Hannah watched him go, a strange sense of closure settling over her. She hadn't needed his apology, but hearing it had untied a final small knot she hadn't even known was still there. Her revenge had never truly been about his destruction. It had been about her own survival and creation. His downfall was merely the consequence of his own choices. Her success was the consequence of hers. As she walked back to her car, her phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Caleb's nanny. He was at his robotics club, holding up a small, clumsy robot he had built his face, beaming with pride. Hannah smiled. That was her empire. That was her victory. Not the company, not the wealth, not the look on Brendan's face in that boardroom years ago. It was the freedom to build a new foundation, one of love, integrity, and purpose. The ghost in the valley was finally gone, and in its place, the future was bright. Hannah Foster's story serves as a powerful real-world reminder that the deepest betrayals can often forge the strongest resolve. She didn't just get even, she got ahead. She transformed her pain not into petty revenge, but into fuel for an empire built on brilliance, integrity, and the sheer unyielding power of a woman underestimated. She proves that your value is never determined by someone else's inability to see it, While her ex-husband is now a footnote in a cautionary tale, Hannah Foster is busy writing the next chapter of a legacy that will outlive them all. She didn't just reclaim her life, she redefined what was possible. What did you think of Hannah's incredible journey from a betrayed wife to a billionaire titan? Was her revenge justified, or was her success the best revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as inspiring as we did, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true life stories of unbelievable triumph. He called her his everything, then paraded his nothing in front of everyone. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of Patricia Chatsworth, a woman who had it all: a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a wardrobe filled with haute couture, and a billionaire husband, Sibylla Pierce, who worshipped the ground she walked on. Or so she thought. At the city's most prestigious charity gala, with the flash of paparazzi cameras lighting up her Dior gown, and the secret of their first child blooming within her, Sibylla shattered their perfect world. He introduced his mistress to society, leaving a pregnant Patricia to crumble in the most public way imaginable. But from those ashes, a new woman would rise. This is the story of how a betrayed wife returned not for revenge, but to build an empire that would make her husband's fortune look like pocket change. Life for Patricia Chatsworth Pierce was a meticulously curated masterpiece. Their home, a sprawling duplex on the 75th floor of 157, wasn't just an apartment, it was a statement. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, a kingdom over which her husband, Sibylla Pierce, reigned. Sibylla, the CEO of Pierce Global Properties, was a man carved from ambition and granite. He had inherited a respectable real estate firm, and with a ruthless blend of charisma and cunning, transformed it into an international behemoth. Patricia was his perfect counterpart. With a master's degree in art history from the Sorbonne, she possessed a quiet elegance that Sibylla's new money desperately craved. She wasn't just a beautiful accessory. She was the curator of their life, transforming their cold, modern spaces into warm, sophisticated homes filled with carefully chosen art. She advised him on acquisitions for the corporate collection and charmed his investors with her intellect and grace. She was in every sense his partner. Their 5th anniversary was approaching, and with it the annual Metropolitan Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of the New York social calendar. This year was different. Patricia held a secret she'd been cherishing for 8 weeks, a secret she planned to reveal to Sibylla in a beautifully wrapped box after the gala, a pair of tiny cashmere booties. She was pregnant. Their child, the true heir to the Pierce empire, was on the way. The evening of the gala, the air in the penthouse buzzed with anticipation. Patricia stood before the mirror, her reflection shimmering in a custom-made navy silk gown by Schiaparelli. The fabric clung to her frame, subtly hinting at the new life she carried. Sibylla entered the dressing room already in his tuxedo. Perfect, Patty. Absolutely perfect, he said, his voice a low hum of approval. He clasped a diamond necklace around her neck, his fingers cool against her skin. The necklace was the Lumière de Cascade, a breathtaking piece from Harry Winston he'd bought at a Sotheby's auction. A queen needs her crown jewels. She smiled, her heart fluttering. It's beautiful, Sibylla. Thank you. He kissed her cheek, a gesture that felt more performative than affectionate. Lately his touches had felt that way, gestures meant for an audience, even when they were alone. There had been late nights at the office, hushed phone calls he'd walk into his study to take, and a new, uncharacteristic scent of a different perfume, a sharp, cloying gardenia that sometimes clung to his suits. She had pushed the thoughts away, blaming her own nascent pregnancy hormones for her unease. Sibylla was a busy man. This was the price of their life. The gala was a chaotic symphony of wealth and power. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks as they stepped from their black Bentley. Patricia smiled, her hand resting protectively over her abdomen, a gesture no one but she understood. Inside the grand hall was a sea of designer gowns and hushed gossip. They held court at their table, a prime spot near the stage, accepting congratulations on a recent skyscraper deal in Dubai. To my brilliant wife, Patricia Sibylla, said, raising his glass of champagne in a toast to their table guests. The soul of our home and the heart of my life. Patricia's cheeks flushed with pleasure. The doubts that had pricked at her conscience melted away under the warmth of his public adoration. This was her husband. This was their life. The first crack in her perfect world appeared an hour later. Sibylla excused himself to network. Patricia was engaged in a conversation with the elderly Mrs. Rothschild about a new Monet exhibition when a ripple of silence spread from the grand entrance. Heads turned, whispers followed. Standing there, bathed in the archway's light, was a woman who was Patricia's complete opposite. She was sharp angles where Patricia was soft curves, her platinum blonde hair cut in a severe geometric bob. She wore a blood-red Alexander McQueen dress that looked less like a gown and more like beautiful, dangerous armor. Her name was Kendra Lowe, a ruthless up-and-comer in the world of venture capital, known for her aggressive takeovers and even more aggressive social climbing. And walking toward her, his hand outstretched, was Sibylla. Patricia watched a cold knot forming in her stomach as Sibylla took Kendra's hand. He didn't just greet her, he possessed her, his hand sliding from her fingers to the small of her back. He guided her through the crowd, not towards a peripheral group, but directly towards the center of the room, towards their table. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They stopped a few feet from where Patricia sat, frozen. The world seemed to narrow to this single horrific tableau. Patricia Sibylla's voice was smooth, but his eyes were like chips of ice. I'd like you to meet Kendra Lowe. Kendra is a very important new partner for the company. Kendra's smile was a slash of crimson lipstick. It didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes, which flickered over Patricia's gown, her diamonds, and then with a flicker of triumphant disdain, seemed to linger for a moment on her stomach. It's a pleasure to finally meet the woman behind the man, Kendra said, her voice a purr. The emphasis on behind was a deliberate, poisoned dart. Patricia couldn't speak. The air had been sucked from her lungs. This wasn't a business introduction. The way he held her, the proprietary gleam in his eye, the way the entire room was holding its collective breath, this was a declaration. He hadn't just brought his mistress to the gala. He was presenting her, flaunting her. A well-known society columnist, Brenda Maxwell, sidled up to their table, her pen poised. Sibylla. A bold move. Is Pierce Global Properties expanding into venture capital? Sibylla's smile widened. He pulled Kendra closer. His hand splayed possessively on her hip. Pierce Global is always expanding. We're moving into a new era, a more dynamic future. The subtext was a sledgehammer. Patricia was the past. This woman was the future. The room was spinning. The faces of her friends and acquaintances were a blur of pity shock and morbid curiosity. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her reaction. She felt the delicate life inside her, a secret that was supposed to be a joyous gift, now felt like a lead weight in her womb. She rose from her chair, her legs trembling. Sibylla. she whispered, her voice barely audible. "May I have a word with you in private?" He looked at her as if she were a stranger, a minor inconvenience. "We're a little busy right now, Patricia. Why don't you go get some air?" It was the dismissal that broke her. Not the affair, but the casual public cruelty of it. He had taken their life, their marriage, and set it on fire in front of the entire world, and he didn't even have the decency to look her in the eye while it burned. She turned her Schiaparelli gown, feeling like a shroud, and walked away from the table. She didn't run. She walked with a dignity she didn't feel, past the staring faces, past the whispers that followed her like a trail of smoke. Each step was an agony. The flash of a camera went off in her face, and in that blinding white light, she saw her future a ruin. She didn't stop until she reached the cold marble of the ladies' lounge. Leaning against the sink, she stared at her reflection. The diamonds around her neck felt like a slave's collar. Her perfect face was a mask of horror. And as the first sob tore through her, a sharp, cramping pain shot through her abdomen, a terrifying premonition of all the things she was about to lose. The Bentley ride back to the penthouse was a silent, suffocating ordeal. Patricia sat pressed against the far door, the plush leather feeling cold and alien. Sibylla sat beside her, radiating a chilling indifference. He scrolled through his phone, a small triumphant smile playing on his lips as notifications likely poured in about his dramatic social coup. He hadn't just launched a new business partnership. He had launched a new public identity, and he had used his wife's humiliation as the runway. When the car door opened, in the sterile silence of their private garage, Patricia moved on autopilot. She walked into the elevator, her gaze fixed on the polished steel doors, refusing to look at him. The cramping in her belly was a dull, persistent ache, now a drumbeat of dread. Inside the penthouse, the magnificent view of the city skyline seemed to mock her. A kingdom she no longer had a place in. What was that, Sibylla? Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual melodic tone. He finally looked up from his phone, his expression one of mild irritation. What was what, Patty? It was business. You're being hysterical. Hysterical. The word, so dismissive, so patronizing, cracked something open inside her. You brought that woman, your mistress, to the most public event of the year. You stood her next to me. You humiliated me in front of every person we know. He shrugged, walking to the bar and pouring himself a whiskey. Kendra is not just a mistress. She's a formidable asset. Her firm is backing our new Tech City project in Austin. It was a strategic announcement. A strategic announcement, she repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. You announced your affair as if it were a quarterly earnings report. Don't be so naive, he sneered, turning to face her, the amber liquid swirling in his glass. This is how the world works. We had become stale, predictable. People respect power, Patty, boldness. What I did tonight, that was power. It's got everyone talking. The Pierce Global stock will probably jump 5 points tomorrow on the buzz alone. Patricia stared at him, truly seeing the man she had married for the first time. The charming, ambitious man she had fallen in love with was a facade. Beneath it was this, a cold reptilian creature who saw human beings as assets and liabilities. And tonight, she had been reclassified as a liability. And what about me? What about our marriage? She whispered, the fight draining out of her. The marriage served its purpose, he said, with brutal finality. You gave me class. You curated a beautiful life. But I've outgrown it. I need someone who can play in the big leagues, not just pick out curtains and paintings. The insult was designed to gut her, to reduce her entire contribution to their life to domestic fluff. It worked. She felt hollowed out, worthless. And then she remembered the secret she still held. Hope, fragile and desperate, flickered within her. Maybe this would change things. Maybe the reality of a child would pierce through his monstrous ego. Sibylla, I'm pregnant. The words hung in the vast, silent room. He stopped swirling his drink. For a moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, shock, maybe even fear. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold, calculating mask. He took a slow sip of his whiskey. Well, that is inconvenient timing. Inconvenient. Her heart, already shattered, seemed to disintegrate into dust. Their child was an inconvenience. We'll handle it. He continued, his tone chillingly practical. My lawyers will draft a generous severance for you. An NDA, of course. We'll set you up in a nice apartment, maybe back in California, near your brother. You can have the baby quietly. A trust will be established. No one needs to know it's mine. It would complicate the narrative with Kendra. He was erasing them. With a few calculated sentences, he was writing her and their unborn child out of his life story. The cramp in her abdomen suddenly intensified, sharp and vicious. She gasped, doubling over and clutching her stomach. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Sibylla. She breathed a new terror, eclipsing everything else. Something's wrong. He looked at her with detached annoyance. Stop being so dramatic, Patricia. It's a classic move. Don't think some phantom pain is going to make me change my mind. No, you don't understand. She gasped, leaning against a marble column for support. A terrifying warmth was spreading through her. I think I'm bleeding. He just stared. There was no concern in his eyes, no rush to help. There was only suspicion, as if her physical agony was just another negotiation tactic. That was the moment Patricia Chatsworth Pierce died. In her place, something harder, something colder began to form. She looked at the man she had loved, the father of the child she was now losing, and saw nothing but a monster. With the last of her strength, she pushed herself off the column. "Get out!" she rasped. "This is my house, Patricia. Get out!" Her voice was a low growl, filled with a venom that surprised them both. She ignored the pain, her entire being focused into a laser of pure hatred. "If you are not out of this apartment in 5 minutes, I will call Brenda Maxwell myself and give her a story that will make your strategic announcement look like a fairy tale. I will tell her and every other reporter in this city about the child you're abandoning. Your stock won't jump 5 points. It will plummet 50. For the first time that night, she saw fear in his eyes. Not for her, not for their child, but for his company, for his reputation, the narrative. He set his glass down. "Fine. Have your tantrum. My lawyers will be in touch with yours." He turned and walked out of the penthouse and out of her life without a single backward glance. The moment the door clicked shut, her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the cold marble floor, the world dissolving into a vortex of pain and grief. Her hand came away sticky and red. Her baby. Their baby. Gone. Lost in the wreckage of a life that had been a beautiful lie. Lying there alone in the gilded cage she had built, Patricia Chatsworth didn't just cry. She mourned the death of her child, her husband, and the woman she used to be. The night was not just an ending. It was a brutal, agonizing annihilation. The first few weeks were a blur of grey. Patricia didn't stay in the penthouse. She couldn't. Every polished surface, every piece of art she had so lovingly placed, was tainted by Sibylla's betrayal. The moment she was physically able, she packed a single suitcase and fled, leaving behind the diamonds, the couture and the ghost of her former life. Her brother Leo Chatsworth was her savior. A pragmatic, no-nonsense corporate lawyer based in San Francisco, he flew to New York the moment he heard her broken voice on the phone. He didn't offer platitudes or empty comforts. He offered action. He installed her in a discreet, serviced apartment at the Carlyle, handled the initial venomous communications from Sibylla's legal team, and simply sat with her in the silence, a solid, unwavering presence against the storm. "He's offering a settlement," Patty Leo said one afternoon, looking through a thick legal document. "It's generous, as he puts it. 7 figures an apartment in Tribeca, contingent on a lifelong non-disclosure agreement that's so restrictive you wouldn't be able to tell our own mother his favorite color." Patricia, who had been staring blankly at the rain-streaked window, turned to him. The listlessness that had clouded her eyes for weeks was gone, replaced by a flicker of hard, cold fire. "Tell them to take their offer and burn it," she said, her voice flat. "I don't want his blood money. I don't want anything from him. I want him erased from my life." Leo raised an eyebrow, a slow smile spreading across his face. "There she is," he said softly. "I was wondering when you'd show up." That was the turning point. Grief was a cold, heavy cloak, but beneath it anger was a furnace. The miscarriage had devastated her, carving a permanent hole in her soul, but it had also cauterized the wound of her love for Sibylla. There was nothing left to salvage, nothing left to mourn but the child. The man was dead to her. She refused his settlement. Leo, using his legal prowess, negotiated a simple, clean divorce. Sibylla, eager to clear the way for his new life with Kendra and avoid any public messiness, agreed. Patricia asked for only 2 things, her maiden name back, and a small portfolio of art she had personally acquired before the marriage pieces she'd bought with her own inheritance from their grandmother. It was a pittance to a man like Sibylla, and he signed off on it without a second thought. With the divorce finalized, Patricia Chatsworth sold the art. The pieces, a few minor impressionist sketches, and a promising contemporary sculpture, fetched nearly $500,000. It wasn't billionaire wealth, but it was hers. It was a start. And with that money, she bought a one-way ticket to the only place that had ever felt like her own sanctuary, Paris. She didn't rent a chic apartment in Saint-Germain. She found a small, dusty flat on the top floor of a building in Le Marais, with a leaky skylight and a view of 1,000 crooked rooftops. The city wasn't a playground for her anymore. It was a workshop. She poured her energy not into social events, but into her original passion, art restoration. She remembered a name from her time at the Sorbonne, Antoine Dubois, a legendary art restorer who ran a small, exclusive workshop. He was a purist, an old master who worked with museums and private collectors who valued skill over speed. She called him her French fluent but rusty and asked for a meeting. Dubois' workshop was a cavern of wonders, smelling of linseed oil, turpentine, and old canvas. Canvases in various states of repair leaned against the walls like weary soldiers. Dubois himself was a small man with kind, tired eyes and hands stained with a century of pigments. He listened patiently as Patricia, not as the former Mrs. Pierce, but as a humble art historian, explained her skills and her desire to learn the physical craft of restoration. He was skeptical. "This is not a glamorous hobby, Mademoiselle Chatsworth. It is patient, painstaking work. It is dust and chemicals, and hours spent staring at a single square centimetre of cracked paint." "I'm not looking for glamour, Monsieur Dubois," she replied, her gaze steady. "I'm looking for work." He tested her. He gave her a small, forgotten 18th century portrait, marred by a clumsy Victorian-era varnish that had yellowed and obscured the delicate brushwork beneath. For weeks, Patricia worked in a quiet corner of his studio. She arrived before his other apprentices and left long after they were gone. She immersed herself in the science of solvents, the delicate art of in-painting. The intense microscopic focus required was a balm to her fractured mind. While she meticulously removed the discolored varnish, she felt as if she were also stripping away the layers of her old life, revealing the stronger substance underneath. Her hands, once accustomed to the smooth chill of diamond necklaces, were now chapped and stained. She traded her designer heels for practical flats and her gala gowns for a simple work smock. And slowly, she began to heal. One evening, Dubois stood behind her, watching as she applied a final protective layer to the restored portrait. The subject's face, once hidden behind a yellow fog, now shone with life, the artist's original, vibrant colors resurrected. "You have the touch, mademoiselle," he said, his voice filled with quiet respect. Not just the knowledge, but the patience, the soul of an artist. That praise meant more to her than all of Sibylla's empty compliments about her beauty. It was validation of her skill, of herself. Dubois began giving her more important projects. Her reputation within the small, cloistered world of European art restoration began to grow. She was known for her meticulous research, her delicate hand, and her uncanny ability to understand an artist's original intent. 2 years after her arrival in Paris, Patricia was working on a commission from a Belgian museum when she realized her period was late. A cautious, terrifying hope bloomed in her chest. A visit to a discreet doctor on the Rue de Rivoli confirmed it. She was pregnant. There had been a brief, gentle affair with a kind university professor who saw her for who she was not, who she had been married to. It had ended amicably when he'd taken a post in another country, but he had left her with the one thing she thought she had lost forever. This time there was no billionaire husband, no penthouse, no public announcement. There was only Patricia in her small Parisian flat, with her own hard-earned money and a future she was building with her own 2 hands. She placed a hand on her stomach, and for the first time since that horrible night, she felt a profound, unadulterated joy. This child would not be an heir to a cold empire. This child would be hers, her motivation, her masterpiece. She would name her Rosalind, a name that meant beautiful rose, a flower that could grow and thrive from the rubble. The next 5 years were a whirlwind of quiet, relentless construction. Patricia gave birth to a healthy, beautiful daughter, Rosalind, a child with her mother's thoughtful grey eyes and a spirit of pure sunshine. Motherhood redefined Patricia's ambition. It was no longer fueled by the bitter ashes of revenge, but by the fierce protective fire of a parent's love. She was not just rebuilding a life for herself. She was building a fortress for her daughter. She founded her own company, Chatsworth Restoration. Operating initially out of a larger studio space she leased near the Place des Vosges, she hired 2 of the best apprentices from Dubois' workshop. Antoine Dubois, now semi-retired, acted as her mentor and occasionally consulted on challenging projects, his revered name lending her fledgling company immediate credibility. Chatsworth Restoration became known for a niche expertise, identifying and restoring sleepers' paintings of immense value that had been misattributed or forgotten, hidden under layers of grime and neglect in dusty private collections and provincial auction houses. Patricia combined her academic knowledge with her hands-on skill. She would spend weeks in libraries and archives, tracing the provenance of a piece before ever touching a solvent to its surface. Her breakthrough came in her 3rd year of business. She was contacted by a Spanish family, the de Vegas, whose ancestors had been patrons of the arts. They had a large, dark painting of Venus, that had been hanging in a drafty corridor of their ancestral castle for 200 years. It was attributed to a minor student of Velázquez and was considered largely worthless. They wanted it cleaned simply for sentimental reasons. When the painting arrived at her Paris studio, Patricia felt a familiar thrill. The composition was clumsy in parts, but the way the light fell on the subject's skin, the masterful rendering of the velvet drapery, it felt different, important. For 6 months, she and her team worked. They ran pigment analysis, X-rayed the canvas, and spent 1,000 hours on the restoration. As they painstakingly removed the dark, heavy overpainting from a 19th century modesty campaign, they uncovered the original breathtaking brushwork beneath. And in a corner, hidden under a layer of brown paint, they found a faint, looping signature. It wasn't a student's. It was the signature of Artemisia Gentileschi, one of the most celebrated and fiercely independent female artists of the Baroque period. It was a lost masterpiece, the sleeping Venus of de Vega. The art world erupted. The discovery was the subject of front-page articles in Le Monde, The Times of London, and La Repubblica. When the painting was authenticated and went to auction at Christie's in London, it sold for a staggering $32 million. As part of her contract, Patricia had negotiated a percentage of the sale price as her fee, a common practice for high-stakes restoration discoveries. Overnight, Patricia Chatsworth was not just a respected restorer. She was a millionaire. A self-made millionaire. The story was irresistible. The brilliant art historian, the hidden masterpiece, the woman who had built her own success from nothing. She was featured in Forbes magazine's Europe's 30 Under 30. Even though she was in her early 30s, they made an exception for the compelling narrative. The article mentioned she was American, but barely touched on her past life in New York, framing her as a quintessential Parisian success story. Patricia used the money not for luxuries but for expansion. She diversified, adding art curation and investment consultation to her business services. She became a trusted advisor for a new generation of wealthy tech entrepreneurs and old money families who wanted to build collections with meaning and value. Her company, now rebranded as the Chatsworth Art Group, opened a small chic office in Geneva to handle the financial side of the business. She and Rosalind lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. They had a beautiful apartment on the Ile Saint-Louis with a view of the Seine. Rosalind attended a small private bilingual school. Their life was filled with museum visits, picnics in the Jardin du Luxembourg, and the comforting familiar scent of oil paint and old books. Patricia had found more than success. She had found peace. But as her European empire grew, she knew a crucial piece was missing. The heart of the global art market, the city with the wealthiest and most ambitious collectors, was still New York. To truly cement her legacy and take her company to the next level, she had to go back. She had to plant her flag in the very city that had cast her out. The decision was terrifying. It meant returning to the scene of her greatest humiliation. It meant the possibility of running into Sibylla. But looking at her daughter now, a bright, curious 5-year-old Patricia knew she couldn't let fear dictate their future. She wouldn't let Sibylla Pierce have the power to keep her exiled from her own home country. She made the call to a commercial real estate agent in Manhattan. She wasn't looking for a small office. She was looking for a flagship gallery space. A statement. She found the perfect location, a multi-level light-filled building in Soho that had once been an ironworks factory. As the contracts were signed and the plans for the grand opening began, the New York media caught wind of the story. Parisian art prodigy Patricia Chatsworth to open Soho Gallery read a headline in the New York Times style section. The article praised her European success, her famous Gentileschi discovery, and her formidable reputation. It was accompanied by a recent photo of her confident, elegant, and looking directly at the camera with an unreadable, powerful gaze. In his Park Avenue office, Sibylla Pierce read the article, the newspaper rattling in his hand. The photo was of a woman he barely recognized. The soft, accommodating girl he had married was gone. In her place was a formidable stranger, Patricia Chatsworth. He noted with a jolt that she had taken back her maiden name. He scrolled through photos of her, online pictures of her speaking at conferences in Zurich, cutting the ribbon on a museum wing she had helped curate in Amsterdam. Then he saw a photo of her in a park, laughing with a small, dark-haired girl, a girl who would be about 5 years old. A cold, unfamiliar feeling, a mixture of shock, regret, and a strange possessive anger began to twist in his gut. His discarded asset had somehow impossibly become a blue-chip stock, and she was coming back. The return to New York was a meticulously planned invasion. Patricia didn't slip back into the city. She arrived. She purchased a stunning brownstone in the West Village, a world away from the cold glass tower she had once called home. It was a house with character, with a garden for Rosalind to play in, filled with the art and books that defined their life, not a husband's status. The renovation of the Soho Gallery was her primary focus. For 6 months, she was a whirlwind of focused energy. She flew in architects from Italy and lighting designers from Stockholm. The space was transformed into a modern temple of art with soaring ceilings, polished concrete floors, and walls of brilliant white. It was named simply Chatsworth. The news of the gallery's impending launch party sent shock waves through the city's elite. It wasn't just another gallery opening. It was an event. The return of Patricia Chatsworth was a story too juicy to ignore. Whispers swirled in the same circles that had watched her fall apart 5 years ago. They remembered the humiliated wife fleeing the Metropolitan Foundation Gala. Now they were reading about the self-made millionaire, the art world powerhouse who had conquered Europe. The cognitive dissonance was intoxicating. Invitations to the Chatsworth opening became the most coveted social currency of the season. Patricia curated the opening exhibition herself. It was titled Resurgence, a collection of works by contemporary female artists who explored themes of transformation, strength, and the reclamation of narrative. The centerpiece was a magnificent large-scale abstract painting by a celebrated Japanese artist, full of bold, explosive color, breaking free from a dark, fractured background. It was a statement of intent. The night of the opening, Patricia stood on the gallery's mezzanine level, looking down at the arriving crowd. She wore a tailored emerald green jumpsuit by Roland Mouret, powerful, sleek, and utterly modern. Her hair was cut in a chic, shoulder-length style, and her only jewelry was a pair of simple diamond studs. She was not the girl in the Schiaparelli ball gown. She was the woman who owned the building. Her brother Leo was by her side, a proud grin on his face. "You did it, Patty," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "You really did it." "We did it," she corrected, smiling at him. "I couldn't have survived that first week without you." "Yeah, well, I just held the door. You're the one who built the damn castle." The gallery filled with a glittering mix of artists, collectors, museum curators, and the inevitable society figures, all craning their necks to catch a glimpse of their hostess. Patricia descended the floating steel staircase, moving through the crowd with an easy, confident grace. She greeted people warmly, discussing the art with passion and expertise. She was in her element, in complete control. And then she felt a shift in the room's energy. A familiar, cold dread, the ghost of a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She looked toward the entrance. Sibylla Pierce and Kendra Lowe had arrived. Sibylla looked much the same, his tailored suit still impeccable, but there were fine lines of stress around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Kendra was draped in a silver-sequined dress, her expression a mixture of defiance and curiosity. They were a power couple, but tonight they felt like intruders in someone else's kingdom. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Patricia saw a flicker of shock in Sybilla's gaze, a raw disbelief that the composed, powerful woman before him was the same broken girl he had dismissed 5 years ago. He had expected to see a survivor. He was not prepared for a conqueror. Kendra's smile was tight, her eyes sweeping over the gallery with an appraising, competitive glare. She saw the sheer scale of Patricia's success, the genuine respect she commanded from the city's cultural elite, and the mask of smug superiority slipped for just a moment. Patricia didn't falter. She didn't hide. She ended her conversation with the director of the MoMA and began to walk calmly and deliberately toward them. The crowd seemed to part for her, the ambient chatter dimming as people sensed the impending collision. This was the moment she had both dreaded and, on some level, prepared for. This was the test. She stopped a respectable distance from them, her posture perfect, her expression serene. "Sybylla, Ms. Lowe," she said, her voice cool and even. "Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoy the exhibition." Her use of Ms. Lowe was a subtle but sharp jab. After all these years, they weren't married. The great love affair that had destroyed her marriage hadn't culminated in the ultimate partnership after all. She saw the slight wince in Kendra's expression. Sybylla recovered, first slipping into his old, charming facade. "Patricia, it's incredible. What you've accomplished. We've been following your success. It's truly remarkable." "I've been busy," she replied, a simple statement of fact that held a universe of meaning. "We should talk," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "Catch up. There's a lot to discuss." Patricia gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "I don't believe there is, Sybylla. Everything that ever needed to be said between us was said 5 years ago in this city. This gallery this evening, this is a new conversation, and it has nothing to do with you." She held his gaze for a moment longer, letting the finality of her words sink in. There was no anger in her eyes, no pain. There was something far more devastating indifference. She had not only survived him, she had rendered him irrelevant. Without waiting for a reply, she gave them a polite, dismissive nod and turned away, moving deeper into the heart of her gallery, her world. She left them standing at the entrance, 2 ghosts from a past she had fully and finally transcended. The Queen had returned to her city, not to reclaim an old throne, but to unveil a new one built entirely by her own hands. The gallery opening was a triumph. The next morning, Patricia's face was on the cover of every society and arts journal in the city. Chatsworth's resurgence, a triumphant return, was the headline in Women's Wear Daily. The focus was on her business acumen, her artistic eye, and the sheer force of her will. The encounter with Sybylla and Kendra was relegated to a single delicious sentence in Brenda Maxwell's gossip column. Sybylla Pierce and Kendra Lowe made a brief appearance, looking like relics from a bygone era, in the gleaming new world of Patricia Chatsworth. For Sybylla, that sentence was a paper cut that festered into a gaping wound. The world he had so carefully constructed was beginning to crumble. The dynamic future he had promised with Kendra had not materialized as planned. Their aggressive venture capital projects had yielded a few early successes, but several high-risk tech investments had recently collapsed, costing Pierce Global Properties hundreds of millions. His reputation for ruthless genius was being re-evaluated as reckless gambling. The old guard of New York real estate men he had once scorned now whispered that he had lost his touch distracted by his flashy, high-maintenance partner. His relationship with Kendra was a constant power struggle. The passion had cooled into a transactional partnership. They were bound not by love, but by a shared, desperate need to maintain an image of success. Kendra, who had seen Sibylla as her rocket to the stratosphere, was growing resentful as his trajectory began to plateau. Patricia's return threw their precarious situation into stark relief. She wasn't just a successful ex-wife. She was a symbol of a different kind of power, one built on substance taste and genuine creation, not just leveraged assets and hostile takeovers. She made them look cheap, driven by a mixture of desperation and a bruised ego. Sibylla began trying to force his way back into her orbit. He started with a massive floral arrangement sent to the gallery, a gaudy explosion of orchids and lilies with a simple card, "Congratulations, let's have dinner." D. Patricia instructed her assistant to donate the flowers to a local hospital and to throw the card in the trash. Next, he tried a professional angle. A formal letter arrived from his legal team proposing a partnership. Pierce Global Properties was developing a new luxury residential tower on the Hudson Yards and wanted to commission the Chatsworth Art Group to curate the building's entire art collection from the lobby to the penthouse suites. It was a multi-million-dollar contract, an offer most firms would have killed for. Patricia read the proposal in her office, a calm, sunlit room overlooking the gallery floor. She recognized the strategy immediately. It wasn't about the art. It was about associating his brand with hers. It was about him buying back a piece of the credibility he had lost. It was about control. She dictated a polite but firm refusal to her assistant. The Chatsworth Art Group's current project schedule does not allow for any new large-scale commissions at this time. We wish Pierce Global Properties the best in their search for a suitable partner. The message was clear. She didn't need his money or his projects. His attempts grew more personal, more desperate. One afternoon, while Patricia and Rosalind were getting ice cream at a small shop near their home in the West Village, Sibylla happened to be walking by. "Patty fancy seeing you here," he said, his smile forced. Patricia's body went rigid. She instinctively put a protective arm around Rosalind, who was focused on her chocolate fudge scoop. "Sibylla," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. His eyes fell on Rosalind. He stared at the little girl, at her dark hair and serious grey eyes her eyes. A complex emotion flickered across his face, curiosity, regret, and something that looked disturbingly like ownership. "This must be," he started, his voice softening. "This must be Rosalind." "Her name is Rosalind." "Yes," Patricia said, her tone a clear warning. "And we're just leaving." "She's beautiful, Patty," he said, his gaze fixed on the child. She has your eyes." He was trying to build a bridge to create a connection where none existed. He had forfeited the right to this child, to this life 5 years ago on a cold marble floor. "My daughter and I have a class to get to," Patricia said, her voice like steel. She took Rosalind's hand, dropped a $20 bill on the counter without waiting for change, and guided her daughter out of the shop, walking past Sibylla as if he were a lamppost. She didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes on them, a burning, possessive gaze that made her skin crawl. That night she called Leo. "He's not giving up, Leo." He approached Rosalind. "That son of a bitch," Leo swore. "Don't worry, I'll handle it. I'll send his lawyers a letter so clear it will singe their eyebrows. He has no parental rights. He signed them away. One more unsolicited approach, and we'll file for a restraining order." The legal threat worked for a time, but Sibylla's desperation was reaching a tipping point. And then Patricia discovered a secret that would give her the ultimate final checkmate. She was in the process of acquiring a small private art collection from the estate of a recently deceased hedge fund manager. As part of her due diligence, she was going through the provenance records for each piece. One painting in particular, a beautiful landscape from the Hudson River School, caught her eye. As she traced its ownership history back through the decades, she saw a familiar name. The painting had been sold in the late 1990s from the estate of Alistair Pierce, Sibylla's grandfather. Her curiosity piqued. She started cross-referencing other pieces from the collection. She spent a week digging through auction records and private sales archives. A shocking picture began to emerge. The hedge fund manager had acquired nearly a dozen significant pieces that were once the core of the original Pierce family collection. This was the old money art, the foundation of the family's cultural legacy. She remembered Sibylla bragging about how his grandfather had been a great collector. Why would these pieces be sold off? She made a call to a trusted contact, an older art dealer who knew all the city's secrets. The dealer's story was damning. "Oh, the Pierce collection," he'd said with a sigh. "A tragedy. Young Sibylla sold it all off about 10-15 years ago. He needed liquidity for some high-risk commercial real estate venture in Asia. He gutted his family's legacy for a quick cash infusion. He thought paintings on a wall were dead money. Most of it was bought up by a hedge funder, a fellow named Peterson. A much smarter collector in the long run." Patricia hung up the phone, her mind reeling. Sibylla hadn't just built an empire. He had done it by secretly selling off its foundation. His entire persona was a lie built on a legacy he himself had dismantled and sold for parts. And the crowning irony, the centerpiece of her own acclaimed discovery, the Gentileschi masterpiece, the Sleeping Venus of de Vega, she now realized with a jolt of ice-cold clarity that she had outbid that very same hedge fund manager, Peterson, to acquire it for her Spanish clients. She had unknowingly prevented the greatest piece of all from falling into the hands of the man who held the rest of Sibylla's family legacy. She now held all the cards. This wasn't just about personal betrayal anymore. This was about his entire identity. And she knew exactly how she was going to play her hand. The endgame was not a dramatic confrontation in a boardroom or a shouting match in a public place. Patricia's final move was one of quiet, devastating precision, executed on her own terms in her own space. She orchestrated it through Leo. He sent a single formal letter to Sibylla's legal team. The letter stated that Ms. Patricia Chatsworth was in possession of information regarding the sale of the Alistair Pierce collection and was prepared to make this information available to key financial reporters and business biographers. It also stated that she had a final proposal to discuss with Mr. Pierce and that he was to meet her at her gallery alone at 9 o'clock the following evening. Sibylla arrived at the appointed time, stepping into the silent, beautifully lit gallery. The space, empty of its usual throng, felt like a cathedral. Patricia was waiting for him in the main exhibition hall, standing before the explosive, vibrant painting that was the centerpiece of her Resurgence collection. She was dressed simply in black trousers and a silk blouse, her hands in her pockets. She looked completely at ease, a queen in her court. "Sibylla," she said, not turning to look at him. "Thank you for coming. Your lawyer's letter was compelling," he said, his voice tight with barely concealed rage. "What is this, Patricia? Blackmail? Blackmail is such an ugly word," she said, finally turning to face him. Her expression was calm, almost placid. "I prefer to think of it as a final acquisition. I'm simply acquiring the last thing I need from you, your permanent absence from my life and my daughter's." She gestured to a small table where a stack of folders lay. "I know about the collection. Sibylla, your grandfather's collection. I know you sold it off piece by piece to fund your first big gamble. You sold your heritage to build a house of cards. How do you think your investors, the ones who bought into the Pierce family legacy, will feel when they learn that the legacy is a hollowed-out shell he paled? She had him, and they both knew it. His entire brand was built on a foundation of generational wealth and stability. The revelation that he was just another gambler who'd cashed in his family jewels would shatter that image and likely trigger a crisis of confidence in his already struggling company. "What do you want?" he finally rasped. "It's very simple," she said, walking toward him, her steps echoing on the polished floor. "You are going to sign a legally binding document which my brother has already drafted. It will reinforce the fact that you have no paternal claim to Rosalind now or ever. It will include a strict proximity clause stating that you will not come within 500 feet of her, her school, or our home. You will cease all contact, direct or indirect. You will effectively cease to exist in our world." And in return, he asked, his jaw clenched. "In return," she said, stopping just a few feet from him, "the provenance records of your grandfather's collection remain my private research. I have no interest in ruining you, Sibylla. I have no interest in you at all. Your success or failure is completely irrelevant to me. I just want you gone." He stared at her, a maelstrom of emotions warring in his eyes, fury, humiliation, and a dawning, horrified respect. He had created this woman. His cruelty, his betrayal had been the crucible that had forged this unbreakable, brilliant adversary. He had discarded her, and in doing so, had engineered his own defeat. And what about Kendra? He sneered, a last pathetic attempt to wound her. "I suppose you'll enjoy watching her leave me when the money finally runs out." Patricia almost smiled. "Honestly, Sibylla, I haven't thought about Kendra Lowe in 5 years. Your relationships are your own business. They have nothing to do with me." It was the final, perfect cut. She felt nothing for them. Not jealousy, not hatred. Nothing. They were a footnote in a book she had long since finished reading. He stood there for a long moment, defeated. The fight was gone. There was nothing left but the bitter taste of ashes. He walked to the table, picked up the pen, and signed the documents without reading them. He knew Leo's work would be ironclad. He placed the pen down and turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at her, a ghost in the beautiful world she had built. "Was it worth it, Patricia?" he asked, his voice hollow. "All this?" She looked around her magnificent gallery, at the powerful art that lined the walls, and thought of her daughter sleeping safely in their beautiful home. She thought of her work, her purpose, her peace. It was worth everything, she said. And then she turned her back on him, returning her gaze to the art, leaving him to walk out into the night alone. The news broke 6 months later. Pierce Global Properties, over-leveraged and unable to secure new financing, was forced into a massive restructuring. Sibylla Pierce was ousted as CEO. Kendra Lowe, true to his prediction, had left him weeks before her social media suddenly filled with pictures of her on a yacht with an aging tech billionaire. Sibylla stripped of his power, and his wealth faded into obscurity. Patricia read the news on her iPad one morning, while having breakfast with Rosalind. She felt a brief, distant flicker of something, not triumph, not pity, but closure. She closed the article, put her tablet aside, and went back to helping her daughter decide whether her teddy bear wanted to wear a crown or a pirate hat to their tea party. Her empire wasn't built of glass and steel, it was built of love, resilience, and beautiful things. And it was just beginning. That is the incredible story of Patricia Chatsworth. It's a story that proves that the greatest revenge isn't loud and destructive, but quiet, brilliant, and constructive, She didn't set out to destroy the man who broke her. She set out to build a world so magnificent that he no longer had a place in it. Her journey from a heartbroken wife to a self-made millionaire is a powerful testament to the strength that can be forged in the fires of betrayal. It's a reminder that our greatest creations can often rise from our deepest pain. If you were inspired by Patricia's story of resilience and empowerment, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to rebuild stronger than ever before. And for more stories of incredible transformations and inspiring journeys, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to light. Thank you for listening.